Sportsline, but you also saw him covering this storm. He just came in and looked like a news reporter out there.
Yeah.
And so it's open phones. We're taking calls from people. I think people just want to talk about what happened. It's been so emotional, and just to share what happened. What's your perspective? How did it happen that you came in when you did, and what did you see once you came in?
Yeah, so I worked that night, obviously, doing sports, and got home at, I don't know, 11 o'clock, a little bit after 11 o'clock, which is pretty typical for me on a Monday night. And I was just kind of hanging out, and I hadn't actually eaten that night, so I ended up having dinner late, which happens probably too often for me. And I was listening to Bree, who had come on to do some of the forecasting stuff with the western edge things out in Dixon. I was just listening, and all of a sudden I thought, I know her well enough, like her tone is changing. This isn't now just we're monitoring the weather for you. This is a warning that if you're paying attention right now and you're at all in the path of this, you need to be on high alert. And that's what caught my attention, actually. And so I actually sat down and looked at what was going on, and they said, okay, Nashville, this is coming. This is an event, and it is happening. Go to your safe place now. And I was on the south side of downtown and knew the storm, and I lived in Oklahoma for a while, so I know a little bit, watched that whole thing. So I didn't go to a safe place. So don't follow my lead, folks. But I watched through the whole thing and saw Henry on the back porch and Bree. And then because of where I live downtown, I looked out my window and I watched the power flashes as it went across the river into East Nashville, and so I knew it stayed on the ground at least that long. And I'm awake and wide awake at this point, Ben, and so I just thought, you know what? There's going to be a lot of people out. A lot of people need information. Some people might need help that could be readily apparent. I'm going to go out and do what I can. And so I just called the station and said, hey, where would you like me to go? I'm happy to go somewhere. And at first they said, let's go to Germantown, but we already had other people there, and it was about 6 one, half a dozen the other for me. So I just said, I'm going to go to East Nashville, see what I can do. And I went out just with my phone, actually, and started shooting some things, got a couple interviews, and sent them back. And the craziest story of all is one of the interviews I got when I was over there is a guy who used to live in L.A. and produced the show Storm Chasers. And he was going around trying to check on people and see if they were okay. And so I'm interviewing him through that whole process, and he obviously knows who I work for and all that. And so he gets done and he says, you're on TV, right? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I'm the sports anchor, so I don't normally do this, but yes. And he said, do you want me to shoot you and you can do? And I said, if you're willing to stay here and do that, then yes. And so my first hit, which was, I think got on TV because we had to send it back, about 45 minutes after it happened, was actually shot about 35 minutes after it happened by this guy who was a storm chaser who just flipped my phone around. And so I kind of did a walk and talk, first live shot of the night. And then at that point, we actually got one of our photographers out there. And from that point on, I guess because I'm not typically in the rotation of these things, we started there and we said, where else do you want us to go? And we moved from 5 Points, which is my original start, to Main Street. Then we actually didn't end up doing a live shot, but we went to like Cross Point Church and some of that area. We really couldn't get back there. So then we went to Germantown, and then we moved up to, I guess, still Germantown, then into Buena Vista, to a couple of churches that were badly damaged, and then ultimately North Nashville. So we went to essentially every badly affected neighborhood in Nashville. We just bounced around, and we'd spend about 30 minutes someplace, hop in, do a live shot or a look live, and then move on to the next one.
It's fascinating. You saw the power lines, the power surges as the storm went across Nashville. It's interesting they wanted to send you first to Germantown because that's right here by the station. We knew there was damage here. We probably didn't know. We didn't know what had happened over in East Nashville. Now we shortly found out how bad it was. We'll start taking calls here in a moment, but kind of what stood out to you? If there's one person you interviewed or one scene that you saw, what stood out?
Honestly, I'll never forget any part of the night. It's amazing when you walk up to the fury of a storm like this, because you watch it on TV, you see it on TV or in newspapers or something like that, but when you actually walk up and see it in front of you and see a building completely mangled or a house leveled, it's just hard to really imagine that scene until you get up to it. Also in the middle of the night, that's the other thing. So I'd been to a scene kind of like this before back in Oklahoma, but it was broad daylight. And it's one thing to see it there, and it's awful. But when you walk up to it and it's in the middle of the night, and you can't really see anything around you, and you're worried about, are there nails over there? Is that a live power line? You're watching every step, and it's just kind of this high alert, vulnerable feeling that I think people have. And certainly if you live in the neighborhood, that was the other thing, is I was amazed because of how quickly I got there in this case. I was amazed how many people were just out in the neighborhood. The storm was over from their perspective, and they had emerged from their homes to see what was left of their neighborhood. And the reaction, sort of in the immediate shock and awe of people, was really something. But as the night moved along, Ben, I'll tell you what, the biggest thing that probably stuck with me was in each of these neighborhoods we'd go to, we would meet people who inevitably lost everything. They lost their houses, they'd have trees fall on their cars, all those sort of things. They have serious picking up to do in their lives. And each one of them essentially greeted us with a smile and said, it's just a house, it's just possessions. We can rebuild that, but I'm okay, my loved ones are okay, my family's okay, and so we'll get through this. And that was the thing that just stuck with me, is this was an awful day. In the history of Nashville, this is one of the worst nights ever. But yet, when the sun came up in the morning, there were a lot of people who had a sunny disposition about it, because with the exception of 24 families or whatever around the state, we all lived through this. Mm-hmm. And for those people, you're just thankful for that and the opportunity to move on with your life, and the possessions can ultimately be replaced.
When you face mortality in that way, it does make you kind of focus on what is most important and reassess all of your priorities. And yeah, they faced Mother Nature at its most powerful. And that's a tough thing. I bet it is amplified at night. That's interesting to hear you say that. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. You see it on TV, it looks terrible, but when you see it on your own, you're not limited to just that screen. It's all around you, and it's really kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, it is. The other thing that complicated this one, Ben, is a lot of times when you have a storm roll through, especially as powerful with the bow echo to have a tornado, it's a line and it moves through quickly. This was an extended storm. And so for those people who were out there, yes, when it initially went through, there was a little bit of a let up, but then about 45 minutes to an hour later, we had a totally different line of storms with a lot of electricity and a lot of rain that came through. And that was the other thing from a novice weather reporter like myself, but I think for people in general, is not only are you outside in the dark, but you had this impending next line that would come through that had its own consequences that would come with it. Thankfully not nearly as severe as the first one, but it was something you were mindful of for sure.
Well, Steve, thank you. Thanks for coming up here, for sharing this. You're going to be back on a Sportsline, right?
We're actually taking a brief night off of Sportsline. We thought nobody really wanted to engage in a debate about how good the Predators are if they're going to the playoffs tonight, but we'll be back with that next week. I do want to say one thing, if I may. Yeah. The other thing I saw today, I went out to Germantown, North Nashville, with some people and had some food and water and things and just distribute it before coming into work. And the thing that amazed me today is, one, there's a heavy need for that. So if people can get out, if you can find a group that's going to help you do it, by all means, there's a need to do that over the course of this weekend. But the thing that amazed me is how many people wanted to help, how many people wanted to be a part of it. Germantown neighbors who came out unscathed, who knew their neighbors were hurting, who just wanted to be a part of it. And I met a guy from Ashland City, so he wasn't necessarily impacted, but he said, you know what, I got the day off. I'm going to pack my grill in my truck, and he drove in, set up, put a tent up, and he said he brought $150 worth of meat they started with and a tip jar. And so if anybody came and wanted to throw something in, they just repurposed the money, went in and would buy more and keep going until they ran out. And they were there for 3-4 hours off of that little drill, along with us and us passing out what we were going to do. I met another guy from Alaska. And so it's just amazing, the human spirit, when something like this happens. And I always knew Nashville had this servant's heart, really caring heart, and so often we're known for it because of the tourists who come in, the guests who love to come in and vacation in this place. But I think we actually see it the most when we're met with tragedy, when our own are hurting. And we saw it in 1998 with that tornado, and we rebuilt and frankly became a city on the rise out of 1998. And then in 2010, we saw the flood of the century, or the flood of eternity maybe, here in Nashville, and we rebuilt and we became the it city around the country. So through hell or high water, this city continues to rise up. And if you've been out at all in the last 36 hours, there's zero doubt that that's exactly what this city is going to do. And so, as awful as it was, it's one of those things where I walk away and it's just like, I am so darn proud to live in this city and be around the great people here who want to do those things and reach out to people and help whoever they can.
I love that. A servant's heart. That nails it. That's exactly right. Thank you, Steve. That's great. Thanks for being here. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. We'll take more calls. Take a break. We'll be back right after this.